4, verses 35 to 41. Mark 4, verses 35 to 41. And I'm entitled this morning, The Calm in the Time of Storm. Calm in the time of storm. On that day, when evening had come, he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. And other boats were with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat, so that the boat was already filling. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" And he awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Be still, peace, be still." And the wind ceased, and there was great calm. He said to them, "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great fear, and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" Well, so far in Mark, Jesus has demonstrated his power over the spiritual world, remember, by casting out demons. In fact, whenever he would walk into a synagogue or walk into a crowd, the demons would start screaming. They couldn't be around him. And so he's already demonstrated his ability to cast those out and kick their rear substantially. All right, so the next thing he has proven in the book of Mark is that he has the power over the physical human world by healing so many diseases. In fact, in his ministry, disease pretty much was non-existent in that area of Galilee. Anyone who was sick or ill or had a cancer or had any kind of debilitating disease would come and he would heal them. It was never before seen and never since. It was unprecedented. So he's shown his power over the spiritual world, over the physical human world in our lives by healing diseases. And now it's time for him to demonstrate his power over the forces of nature in this world that he created. And he picks a lake. It's really not a sea. They call it the sea all the time, but a sea typically is salt water. This is a freshwater lake, and today it's called Lake Kinneret in Israel. It is very unique. It's an interesting lake that he picked to demonstrate this because it is the lowest elevation freshwater lake in the world. It's 682 feet below sea level.
Oh, wow.
It's not as low as the Dead Sea, but the Dead Sea is so salty that you pretty much float like a cork on the Dead Sea. That's one thing that everybody does when they go to Israel. If you've ever known anybody, they swim in the Dead Sea because you can't really swim in the Dead Sea. You can't get enough of your body under the water to swim. You kind of just bob along the top, and that's because it's so salty. But this is a freshwater lake, 682 feet below sea level. It averages about 150 feet in depth. And it's very unique. They've studied it for years because it has 3 stratifications that pretty much remain that way. So there's incredible algae growth in one of those layers, and it produces an amazing amount of fish. Amazing amount of fish. In fact, I ran across a record in 1896. Not a very big boat brought in 9,200 pounds of fish. 9,200 pounds of fish into one of the ports there. It's surrounded by mountains. On the west and northwest, the mountains go up 1,500 feet from the lake surface. And on the north and northeast and the east, the mountains go up 3,000 feet to the Golan Heights. And so it's down in this major hole down here. And that creates very unique properties. Very unique. It's 13 miles long and averages about 8 miles wide. So it's not real large. The Jordan River feeds it, and the Jordan River starts up in Mount Hermon to the north, which is about 9,200 feet elevation. So it almost drops 10,000 feet. It does drop 10,000 feet if you consider how far it's below sea level. Down to this lake. Even today, it provides over 50% of Israel's water for their nation, for irrigation, for drinking water, everything else. They also have quite a desalinization program in Israel, too. They take seawater, and they're the best in the world at getting rid of that salt. They can make drinking water out of that. Pretty amazing to see that, the science that's over there in desalination. So, year-round, there are winds in that lake. If you've ever been around the lake very much, as Lori grew up a few years up at Ponderay, if you're around the lake, when the winds come up, things change. Things change. The summer months, they'll get warm winds, and that'll stir up some waves. But the winter is worse. And in this lake, when the winter comes, the winds come in from the west and the northwest, come way down those slopes, hit the water, very cold, very strong. Between November and April is the worst time to be on that lake, especially in the afternoon. 10-foot, 12-foot, 15-foot waves are not unusual on a lake that size. And you can imagine if it's only that width. If you've ever, I remember when I was in high school a few times, I go tubing, and my dad was driving, and his goal, of course, was to throw me off the tube because he loved me so much. And so I remember he would do figure eights about 3 or 4 times, and then he'd turn around and come right through the middle of those figure eights, because as those waves run into each other, they get bigger, right? Yeah, I think I did 6 flips one time, as I recall, before I hit the water. At least it felt like 6 flips. And finally, I don't know what hit the water first, but no, he usually got me off by going right through the middle because you couldn't hang on to that. And so you can imagine as those waves would go to the side of that lake, they would bound and come back to the other and make incredible, incredible waves. And that's exactly what's happening here in this story. And the storms come up out of nowhere. Out of nowhere. At least up on Ponderay, where she grew up some, and we go up and have our family reunion up there at that same spot. Up out of Hope, Idaho, you can see the wind coming. As you look to the south, it always comes up the lake, and you can see it's like a black band along the water, and you can watch it come. And pretty soon, sure enough, the waves start coming. And we can get a lot bigger waves than that up there, because you got 30 miles of water before it gets to us, for those winds to churn up the water. But here, there's not near that big a lake. But it's a very, very incredible lake to be on in a storm. So today we're going to talk about 3 calms and a storm. Okay? There's going to be 3 calms, and then at the end we're going to mention a storm that happens. So there's the calm before the storm. There's the calm during the storm. There's the calm after the storm. And then there's the storm after the calm. So we've got those 4 things we're going to be thinking about today. First, the calm before the storm. Now, as we enter verse 35, this is the end of a very big day. He has been very busy this day. He's been teaching like crazy all day. We have record of at least 7 parables that he taught. Many more, I'm sure, during that whole day, as he was sharing much of the day by sitting in a boat offshore to talk to the people on shore. And so he'd been teaching all day, and if you've ever taught, you know that that can be very exhausting, because you're trying to get your point across, and you're trying to think about everything you're saying, and so it's said perfectly. Of course, he had a little advantage, but he still was human, and he still got very tired. So he's exhausted and tired of the big crowd. And so at the end of the day, what does he say? He said, hey guys, we need to move, because if we don't, they're going to be right back in the morning. Let's see if we can get away for a little bit and have some rest. Let's cross the lake. So they're crossing the north part of the lake. And notice, many times when I was a kid, I remember this story as just he and the disciples in this boat. But that's not true. There's a whole little group of boats, fishing boats. Typically, they hold between 10 and 15 people if you really packed them in there. And there was a whole bunch of these boats because either his followers and his disciples are going with him. So most commentaries said like up to maybe even 10 or 15 boats were going with him across at the same time. So it's not just this one boat. So let's get away, verse 35. Let's get away. Now these boats could be either rowed, if there was no wind, they had oars, or they could be sailed. They had a mast and they had figured out how to sail them. So they're cruising along with just a light breeze, and it's a beautiful evening, and everything is just going great. Everybody's happy, they've had a great day, and all of a sudden, they look around and Jesus is asleep. Has a little head pillow back there in the back of the boat, and he curled up with it, went out. Sound asleep. There's a wonderful vision of his humanness, that he understands what it's like to be tired. He knows what it's like to be so tired you can't stay awake, and you just have to go to sleep. I mean, I've done that 2 or 3 times this week at lunchtime at school. I'm so tired, and I'll sit down, and as soon as I sit down and eat my lunch, pretty soon I'm going out. And I mean, I know that never happens to any of you, but sometimes it does to me. So I can understand how he feels there, and he's very tired, and he's sound asleep. And then they turn around and look, and here comes the wind. Comes right up out of nowhere. And it's severe. Okay, they're not unacquainted with this kind of weather. We think up to 7, okay, of the 12 were fishermen. And so they knew what was going on. For sure, Peter and John, those guys, Andrew, they knew. But it was a severe storm. In fact, in the Luke account of this, it's almost like an earthquake, it says. It was so violent, a storm. They were getting thrown all over the place. And water was crashing in the boat. They were bailing the water out, trying to stay alive. And they walk in, and this is the calm during the storm, obviously, when he is asleep. Up to 80-mile-an-hour winds could be going on here. And we've had 70-mile-an-hour winds, 60-mile-an-hour winds here, and you see what it does here. It destroys things here, even on the land. But in the sea, the waves are just immense. This is most likely the winter of about 29 AD, as near as we can tell. And so water's coming over. Verse 38, they say, "Wake up, we're going to die. Don't you even care? We're all going to die." They're panicking. Panicking. This is the first time that that we're told, Jesus has been called on to take away danger. Okay? Everything else has been either healing or casting out demons or teaching. But here he's asked to take away the danger. Please, Lord, take away this storm. Do whatever you can. Obviously, from their response, they didn't know what he could do. But he was the guy that knew more than they did, so he woke them up. They woke him up and said, "Help us, help us, help us." Verse 39. Amazing verse. He awoke, rubbed his eyes a little, stood up in the boat, hung on to something so he wouldn't fall over, said, "Wind, that's enough." Water, settle down. And instantly, it was calm. Instantly, it was calm. What do you say about that? Who controls the weather? God. Who created the weather? God. You think the coal companies control the weather? Do you buy that stuff that they're teaching us now? Modern humanism is so silly. You really think that we humans control the weather of this planet? Think about it. It makes no sense whatsoever. No person controls any part of nature. God does that. All we can do is live through it and accept it. That's exactly right. Don't be fooled by false science, okay? That says we are God, and we control our destiny, and we control the weather. Oh, really? I'll bet LCSC would love to be able to control the weather for this baseball tournament. Do you think they can control when it rains or when it doesn't rain? No! If mankind had that ability, don't you think we'd be using it? Yes, we would. But no, we don't have any control there. None. Jesus created it. He holds it together. He's in total control. And when He chooses, it'll all come apart and burn and be renewed by His creative power. That's true. Last week we were even reminded, remember, by the parable, we don't even understand how a plant grows. Our great scientific minds haven't even figured out how you put a seed in the ground and it turns into a corn stalk. We don't know how that happens. We know what happens. We know a few things we can do to help it happen better. We can give it, some water, and we can provide some of that. But you look at the farming that goes on around here. These farmers put seed in the ground. They don't have a clue if it's going to rain for 2 months. And yet, look what God does. They got all the seed in the ground here last week, and look what it's doing, raining like crazy. Those seeds are popping right out of the ground in our place. It's popping out of there. Did farmers do that? Farmers didn't do that. They put the seed in the ground, but they have nothing to do with how it grows. God provides the water. God provided the soil. They can modify the soil a little bit, sometimes the wrong way, but they can change that some. But God is the one that does this, you guys. God is the one that does this. You know, it's interesting. We study fish, we study birds, that when we remember about 3 years ago, I went through beginnings in Genesis. And it's incredible when you consider that just hummingbirds, we've got some hummingbirds coming around. And often they're the same hummingbirds that were there last year. Realizing that they've gone to the southern tip of South America, okay, during the winter, and flown all the way back here. How do they know where our house is? They don't have an atlas. They don't have a laptop with a GPS. They don't have a cell phone. Who brings them back? God brings them back to our house. When I took biology in college, they said, oh yes, in fact, we know why the salmon come to exactly the same bar where they were. It's because of the smell of the water. Really? It's God that brings them back to that spot. You bet He does. And they do. They come right back to the very same gravel bed they were hatched out of. They've been out in the ocean. Steelhead do that. They've been out in the ocean for 3-4 years sometimes. They come right back up the river, go back to that exact same gravel or sand. Science can't figure it out. They think it's because they smell the water. How can they smell the water in some little creek when they're clear down in the middle of the Columbia River? No. God directs them, doesn't He? You bet He does. You bet He does. Does the same thing for birds, does the same thing for all kinds of things. The latest thing they've got now is they think these birds can figure out how to migrate because they have shavings of iron in their brain that line up with true north. Have you heard this? That's the best they can do. So they think they have this little compass in their brain, and it turns them, and then they say, oh, that's north, so I better go this way so I can get to Lori and Brent's house. No, God created, Jesus created with His Word. The Word of His mouth. And what does He do in this storm? With the Word of His mouth. He stops it all. Anybody here going through a storm? There's a lot of storms, aren't there? Financial storm. Relational storms. Everybody get along with everybody in their family just perfectly?
Sure.
Don't raise your hand. You don't belong here if you raise your hand. You're way too superior to be here if you raise your hand. We don't, do we? There's always relational storms. Always. How do we find calm? Calvin told us before we started. Just trust God. You look at those storms as an opportunity to get through them. To show God's power as you walk through them. He doesn't say He's going to take them out of us. He's going to take us out of the storm, does He?
No.
No, that's never promised. But He does promise to walk through with us. There's lots of storms. There's physical storms. Physical problems. Randy's going through one of those today. So is Doris. So is Shirley getting over them. They're all over. Illness is a terrible thing. But He's always there with us to get us through. And even when we don't get through according to human standards, He heals us. Because He takes us to glory where we don't have any problems anymore at all. What kind of healing is that?
Complete.
That is complete, ultimate healing. That's right. It's not a popular thing to say in many churches today. You know, you're supposed to be healthy and wealthy and wise. Well, I don't. He hasn't treated me that way in my life. Certainly not wealthy. Certainly not always healthy. And I'm certainly not very wise. No, I have a lot to learn. So, no, He wants us to be dependent on Him. Right? We never had any pain. We'd never need God. We'd never need medicine. We'd never need physical therapists. We'd never need massage therapists. We'd never need any of that. But because we do have those pains in our life, we do have those problems in our life, we need to depend on Him and the things that He's provided to help us get through those things. Absolutely. So the dependence is what is so important. That's what He's teaching these guys today. Who are you depending on? Yourselves? Yeah, just roll right through that. Go ahead, boys. Are you kidding? We're going to die. I'm going to start crying. I'm so scared. You can see these big macho men. Shut up. I'm here. Watch. Pretty cool.
Climate
He can
change.
do that today. He's still doing that today.
Yes, He is.
And the key is exactly what Calvin said this morning. It's our attitude. It's our attitude. The only thing we can control as we get up in the morning and start the day is our attitude. Can't control the storms, can't control the rain, can't control the car driving through and hitting our house, can't control the guy that T-bones us as we're trying to get to work. No, can't control that. But we can control how we respond to it, can't we? Yes, we can. Verse 40, you still don't know who I am? I can just see his face as he's talking to these guys. Look, how many miracles have I already done that you've never seen anybody else do? And yet here, we got a little wind, a few waves, and you're freaking out. Do you not know who I am yet? Well, obviously they didn't, right? Even after the storm, when it became calm, they were scared. It says they were frightened. It's because they were overwhelmed, I think, by having God in the boat. People all through Scripture realize that they're not worthy when God's in the boat, right? When you come face to face with who God is, you see how dirty you are, don't you? I do. You see how filthy I see how filthy I am. And I go, whoa! I mean, what happens to John in the first book of Revelation, first part of Revelation, when he actually sees Jesus, he hits the ground. Peter says it numerous times. I'm not worthy. Paul said, I'm not worthy. All the prophets in the Old Testament at one time or another, Ezekiel, Elijah, Isaiah, all those guys. I am not worthy. Man of unclean lips. Remember Isaiah? Some of the most incredible words came out of his mouth of any prophet ever. And yet, what does he say? I'm a man of unclean lips. Well, man, you wrote some incredible scripture with God's help. I mean, God wrote through you. But yet he says, it's not me. My mouth is filthy. Only when God speaks through me can I say words like this. That's what he's saying. So we need to be dependent on God. So this is the storm after the calm. They were just blown away that they actually had this superhuman, this superhero, in our terminology, right? And Superman standing in their boat. Who else could control nature? Only God. Only God. Well, even though they don't get it here, I want to give them a little break today. And we're going to give these guys a little break. Let's go to Matthew 14. Because the next time he calms the storm, they have a little bit better response. So I'm proud of them. And we're going to see that today. In Matthew 14, starting in verse 23. Matthew 14, starting in verse 23. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But the boat, by this time, was a long way from the land, and beaten by the waves, and the wind was against them, pushing them out into the lake. They didn't want to go out in the lake. But the winds had another thought in mind. So the winds were pushing them. And in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea, the water. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It is a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And he said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. That wasn't magic. That was God that did it. That wasn't little stones just under the surface like these magicians use all the time, walking across swimming pools and walking across the water. No, this was God keeping him on top of the water. But when he looked around and took his eyes off Jesus, looked around and saw the wind, he got spooked and began to sink. And he cried out, "Lord, save me!" Jesus immediately was there, reached out his hand and took hold of him and said, "Oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him and said, "What? Truly, you are the Son of God." So here they finally got it, okay, who this guy was and who he is. There's still fear there, but at the end they finally figured out that Jesus was actually the Son of God. So there is hope for the human mind to figure this out. As much as people reject him, as much as people don't understand what he does, there is a time, isn't there, when we finally come to our senses. And we pray this for everybody we know, that there is finally a time to come to our senses and realize who Jesus is. And when we realize who he is, all we can do is worship him and give our lives to him and change our attitude. Right? Let him change our attitude. What a blessing is that. For the world can be terrified. The world can be so afraid. The world's going to end in 12 years. You know that, right? There will be no air in the atmosphere in 12 years. I know a number of very famous people who would tell you that straight to your face today. Just turn on CNN this afternoon and you'll hear it. 12 years, we're all gone. Well, I'm sorry, they don't have control of that. They may think they do, but they don't. We know who does. We saw him today. Take a storm and shut it down. And nobody we know can come close to doing it. Not be able to do it in a little glass box in a lab. Walk outside and try that. No. When it's going to rain, it's going to rain. And you're not going to stop it.
Mm-hmm.
So let us trust the one who created all this, okay? And when all these things come up in the news and everybody gets all panicked and oh my goodness, the sky is falling, we can know better. And we can trust the Creator God. Can we? Yes, we can. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for this story. I thank you for this story. Doesn't seem right. Thank you for this account of what really happened that day on that lake with those people. And I think not just of the people in your boat, Jesus, but the people in all the other boats who were having just as hard a time staying afloat. And yet, when you raised your hand and it all stopped, what would they have thought? Father, we're amazed at your power. So easy for us to think that we have power, that we have influence, that we have some sort of control. And yet, when we see events like we did today in the book of Mark, we realize we have no control. We have no power over events in our lives. All we can do is with your help, respond in a trusting way when these storms come up. For they can come up this very day. On our way home, things could happen. We don't know when they're coming. We can't be physically or emotionally prepared, but spiritually we can be prepared. And I pray that each one here would remember that when the next winds start to blow. That we could look to you, not look around like Peter did, but keep our eyes on you as you walk with us on top of that storm and walk us through. Father, we love you. We are so grateful that you are so concerned with our lives. We are not worthy of it, but we are so thankful for it. We love you. Be with each one this week now, that we could share our testimony with someone this week on how good you